Welcome back, City Builders. Kodiak the Kodiak here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about our Cities Skylines II wish list for 2024. Now, we have a bunch of things that we know are confirmed for Cities Skylines II in the new year. These are things like PDX mods, as well as the game coming out for console, which are things that are confirmed. Today's video is going to be covering things that aren't confirmed and are maybe speculated or things that we're waiting on. I also reached out to some fellow Cities Skylines II content creators and have some wish lists from them as well. Now, before we get into all that, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can keep up to date with all the Cities Skylines II news, tips, and tricks. Without further ado, let's get started. Now, before we get into all of the core content today, I want to let you guys know that in the background is a new city that I'm starting that I will be building basically in these extra videos that I do on the channel. In 2024, I have a personal New Year's resolution to put out 2 videos a week if I can, obviously. One being the weekly recap, which I upload on every Sunday, and the next video will be on a second topic that I hopefully will record every Wednesday and have up on either Thursday or Friday. So make sure you guys have notifications turned on so you can keep up to date with all my videos. But anyways, that's enough about that. Let's actually get into the core content here and talk about the Cities Skylines II wish list for 2024. Now, myself and the other content creators in this video will have gone ahead and made ourselves a top 5 of the top 5 things that we want for Cities Skylines II. As I said in the beginning of the video, these are not things that are announced. So we won't be talking about PDX mods here or the game coming to console because we obviously know that that's coming. But a really good example and my number 5 on the list for things that I want in Cities Skylines II in 2024 would be bikes. This was something that was left out of the game at launch, and as far as I understand it, bikes were actually partially developed and finished, but they decided to opt out of it in part of its development cycle in order to get the game out on time. As we know from this Cities Skylines II documentary at this point, that the game has already been delayed for 3 years, and this was something that they left on the afterburner to develop and work on later. So this is something I'm incredibly interested in having in the game in the coming months or over the next year, since it seemed like they were kind of already on the track to finish bikes before they either hit their tech review or some point in development. Bikes and bike infrastructure is a core part of many cities around the world, not just Amsterdam, and I would love to see what they are able to do with bikes and bike infrastructure. Even if the next DLC they announce is a bikes DLC, I would at least hope that the bikes as a core feature would be included in the base game in some way, shape, or form. But I can't say that I wouldn't love a bikes DLC that truly fleshes out the bike mechanic and has things like bike sharing, maybe bike garages, as well as really detailed bike bridges or bike infrastructure. Regardless of how they implement it, I really just want to see bikes in Cities Skylines II in 2024. Next up is a more fleshed out version of a feature that they already have, and that is better seasonal improvements. So it seems to me like winter is not fully finished yet. Obviously, leaves don't fall off of trees, which, as far as I understand it from some content creators who had early access, that was actually a feature at one point in the early build of the game. So it would be really cool to have that back in the game, obviously. But another really great feature that really should have been added to winter is the idea that the grass surfaces that are connected to buildings, specifically homes, for example, don't actually collect snow on them. Now, if you don't know what the surfaces are, these surfaces are an actual drawable asset that you can access in developer mode currently, that you draw just like you would a district or some of the specialized industry fields. We will actually jump back to the specialized industry fields in a second when talking about the winter stuff. But you can draw them out, and you don't actually even need to attach them to the buildings, but they are attached to a lot of the buildings, and that's how we get the different tiles and concrete and grass and all of that other stuff added into the game to make the ground textures look different. Now, if we jump back to the specialized industry, we know that the lumber industry has a different ground texture than the base ground texture, as well as different from the grass. Sometimes I like to use it as like a mulchy-like texture for decorating and detailing. When snow falls on that texture, however, it does actually turn into a winter version of the texture. It actually looks like it has snow on it. Whereas the grass texture for the lawns doesn't, and it just stays green. When you zoom out of your city when it's winter, you'll notice that there's just snow everywhere and then these green heated lawns all over your city, and it just doesn't look right. It doesn't look realistic. It doesn't look good. And you might be like, well, yeah, but then the city's just gonna look white. And it's like, yeah, but that's kind of what cities look like when there's snow on the ground. Like the pavement and the sidewalks get cleaned off and then the grass gets covered. So it would be really cool if we could at least have some winter textures on the ground and the leaves fall off the trees. And it is one of my biggest complaints about the seasonal element of the game, aside from obviously the snow causing a little bit of a performance hit. But other than that, I would really like the winter part of the game a lot more if it actually functioned like winter. And I know that they're capable of doing both of them because the content creators have said that that was in one of the earlier builds of the game. And the grass texture could, in theory, have snow on it because we know the forestry texture works with a snow chain. And we know these surfaces are painted on almost exactly the same because we can access them in developer mode. So that is on my wish list for 2024. Now, next up is something that can obviously be fixed with mods, but it was a base game feature in Cities Skylines 1. And again, I don't like relying on mods to fix a lot of these basic core functions of the game because, again, console players or people who don't play with mods will not have access to these things, and that is zoning adjuster, or just some way to toggle zoning. Now, I don't necessarily need anything too fancy in the base game version of a zoning adjuster. Would it be really cool if we had a more complex one in the game? Sure, absolutely. But for 2024, I would at least like it so that way we could toggle zoning on or off on different roads, just like we could in Cities Skylines 1. Now, I know that was something that was added kind of in the last year or maybe even 2 years at this point of Cities Skylines 1. And as we know, Cities Skylines 2 has been delayed for 3 years. So that was something that was added late to the game. So it probably wasn't ever in the roadmap for Cities Skylines 2 because it was a late added feature. But since they saw so many people liked it, I really hope that they take the time and effort to actually include it into Cities Skylines 2 base game. We obviously have tons of tips and tricks in order to trick the game into zoning exactly how we want it, but it is an incredibly frustrating experience to get the zoning exactly as we want it. And I think just adding a base game feature would be such a cool quality of life improvement that I really wish they take the time to actually put into the game. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent just tricking the game to zone the way I want it to, and then have it break and not work for no reason whatsoever. For those of you wondering how to actually trick the game, you can do it two ways. You can either paint paths on the side of the road, or you can delete the roads you don't want it to zone on, let the building build in, then build the extra roads, or just build the extra roads because the game likes to prioritize older roads for zoning versus newer roads. But sometimes it doesn't always do that, and there are ways to break that rule. So it would just be nice if we had a zoning toggle built into the game. Now, coming in at number 2 is a massive one, and it's one that a lot of people were really disappointed at the launch of Cities Skylines 2 that it didn't have, and it is a core piece of the detailing component of this game, and that's props. They're obviously all in the game. We can access them in developer mode, but there's no other way to access them as a base game player. So if you're playing on console right now, if the game had been launched and is out publicly, there is no way for us to access the props in building the base game. Now, obviously, when we get to the asset editor, once that's fully fleshed out and we get the mod workshop up and running, we'll obviously be able to access those things and put them into our assets as like a linked object. But it'd be really cool if we could at least use these props and put them and make custom parks and things like that, which we'll get to custom parks in a minute for number 1. But it would just be really nice if we could add a little bit more detail to our city since the features are already there, and this was a core feature of Cities Skylines 1, like all of the content creator packs that had just mostly assets to them, or all of the cool things that we got with all of the DLCs that allowed us to add more props to the game. I'm just very confused by this not being included. I understand, again, that the development had been delayed for a while, but it just seems weird to me that this hasn't been added to the game yet, and so that's number 2 for me. And I think it's probably number 2, or at least high up for a lot of people. So before we get to my number 1, I want to actually take a step back for a second and think about what made Cities Skylines 1 so great and some of the core DLCs that were really awesome and helped change the way I saw Cities Skylines 1. Now, obviously, we're going to get the Ports and Bridges DLC that will come out for Cities Skylines 2. It'll be the first major expansion after console kind of gets its all stuff. I think as they said, everything's delayed until console comes out. So I'm really excited to see what they have in store for that DLC. That being said, when we look back at Cities Skylines 1, there were some DLCs that always jump to mind. These are things like the Industries DLC, the Campus DLC, the Airports DLC, and my personal favorite, Parklife DLC. And one of the things I've found myself doing a lot in Cities Skylines 2 is wanting to build parks. I want to take these open areas that don't fit well for buildings and turn them into a living, breathing space that people can come into and enjoy their recreational time. And we don't have a good way to do that. I spent an entire Twitch stream one day trying to figure out if I can get into dev mode, find the hangout spots, and trick people into actually moving into these open spaces and hanging out and treating them like a park, and I found no way to do it. So my number one for Cities Skylines 2 in 2024 would be to have a parks DLC or have a more fleshed out park system in the game to allow us to build more customizable parks than just these fixed square ones. I just find myself in so many situations thinking back to the Parks DLC and being like, wow, this would be such a good spot to build this, or oh, this would be such a good spot to build that, and being unable to do so because the game doesn't have that feature. I'm really disappointed that there's no way to build a customizable park, to be quite honest with you, because I guess one of my perceptions of Cities Skylines 2 before it came out was that there would be a lot more modularness. And while there is in a lot of situations, leaving out a customizable park is a little disappointing. Now, they could be saving this for a DLC, and while some of you might be disappointed that you will have to obviously pay extra money potentially for the ability to be able to create a customizable park, I would like to think that that's actually more of a half-glass empty approach more than a half-glass full approach, because if we look at it from that lens, having them release this as a full DLC, just like they did with the Parklife DLC in Cities Skylines 1, they will be able to commit a lot more time, effort, and resources into creating a really advanced and amazing park customization system in the game if there is a financial incentive behind it for them to do so. So if there's something that's not included in the game and you think maybe I should maybe see if they are going to do a DLC or ask them to do a DLC with this, if they're able to do a DLC, they'll be able to commit a lot more time and resources than they were or are able to do if they were to put it in the base game. So if they were just to put a customizable park system in the base game, it would probably be a lot more lackluster than if they were to do a DLC version of the same thing because of the financial incentive behind it. I hope that makes total sense to you guys. I really just want a customizable park of some kind, whether it be a mod or in the base game. I hope it's in the base game so console has access to it. But gosh, I find myself in so many situations wishing I could turn something into a living, breathing park that people could access and then just falling flat and being unable to do so. And because the Parks DLC was my favorite from Cities Skylines 1, I'm just incredibly disappointed that we don't have this feature in the base game. Now, before we move on to the other creators' top 5, please let me know down in the comments down below what your top 5 things are for Cities Skylines 2 in 2024. We obviously know some of the things that are coming, but what do we not know that's coming that maybe you're looking forward to or excited or hopeful that they might bring to the game? And without further ado, let's move on to the other creators. Now, the first top 5 that we're going to look at for Cities Skylines 2 from other content creators is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Teddy Radko. Now, Teddy Radko is on a little bit of a Christmas break right now, but he did take time out of his busy schedule to send me these top 5 lists, so let's get started with his number 1. His number 1 is developing seasons, much like myself. I also wanted this. This wasn't my number 1. I don't know that he ordered these in any particular order either, but he did give a top 5. He said there's obviously a lot of emphasis on the seasons already, but there's clearly more that can, and he put can in italicized, be done like a proper seasonal change for trees, which is something that I obviously talked about. Not just cover for snow for the whole winter, leafy trees, especially them losing their leaves. A nice good mix of what a season of winter actually is something that, has been a little lackluster, and Teddy is absolutely right. For number 2, he put textures and especially ground textures. It goes without saying, I don't think that map making will nearly be as fun and rewarding until we can paint beaches and fields more freely, and I think he's absolutely correct on that. There is a map texture replacer mod available on Thunderstore right now, but even that is a little lackluster just because of the lack of diversity in the maps as is. But that mod is fully customizable, and if that's something that interests you, please take a look at the Thunderstorm mod. I'll leave a link to it down in the description, as well as a link to all of these wonderful content creators who have submitted me top 5s. Next up for Teddy is number 3, tweaks to network tool. It's a great and flexible tool already, but I can't help to feel it can be made less frustrating to use. Smooth point to elevation would be a huge feature for me, and I think Teddy's absolutely right. I think that the network tool is amazing as is, but there definitely is more that could be done. I sadly just see this as something that maybe will just come with mods, but I think that he's entirely right to think how he thinks about this. Number 4, he has camera mode improvements. Remember settings when you exit the mode would be the first thing to fix, and I think he's absolutely right. It's been an entire frustration for me in Cities Skylines 2 and wanting to record any kind of cool B-roll shots of my city are exclusively hindered by the fact that the camera mode is a little lackluster. He also included that let the users play with the graphics settings turned on would be another. Cinematics in Cities Skylines 2 are a pain in the butt, and he's absolutely right about that. Better track creation and track following would make things better, and I think he's absolutely right. It's really hard to get good cinematic shots tracking certain things. There is a couple mods on the workshop which help with making some quality of life improvements to the camera mode, and obviously this is something that is definitely tailored a bit more towards content creators and showing off our creations. But I think general users would see a pretty big improvement from a lot of these quality of life settings because they'd be more interested in sharing their screenshots and videos and stories that they've created in the game. And that just is good promotion for the game across all of social media when they go out and share these cool shots. And people are interested in it, they learn about the game, and then they're more interested to buy the game. So I think this would just be a net positive for everybody if they made these improvements to the camera mode. Finally, Teddy's last thing is killer DLC content, and I absolutely agree with him on that. So he said Ports and Bridges needs to live up to the name in a big way. Also, I'd like to see the next round of DLC being announced so we can get a better idea of the roadmap of the game in the future. Obviously, this is hindered by the fact that there still don't really have a really concise roadmap of when modding and stuff is going to even be available, but I digress. Announcement of a DLC featuring custom industries, campuses, parks, or airports would make my 2024. So please, for Teddy, for the love of God, Colossal Order, let us know what DLC you guys have in store for us for the rest of the year. Now, that's it for Teddy Radko's top 5. He also included, also bikes, and also monorail tracks, and also Move It mod with export and imports. That's a cuboid thing, not Colossal Order, obviously, but also a multiplayer mod, and then he said now he's done. So, you know, so the last two of those are mods and aren't really Colossal Order's, I guess, prerogative to complete, but I would also be a big fan of a multiplayer mod. I think that'd be super fun. Now that we're done with Teddy Radko, let's move on to the next person that we have a top 5 list for, and that would be Canadian Moose Plays the Legend himself. Moose was very ecstatic to tell me about the mods he wanted for Cities Skylines 2, and I had to remind him that's not the purpose of today's video, and it's actually just talk about base game features, and he was like, oh, okay, sure, let me think of 5. So let me give you Moose's top 5 wishlist items for the base game of Cities Skylines 2. His number 1 was bikes, bikes, and bikes, which I think is probably a reoccurring theme for most people about Cities Skylines 2 because it is such a core component of many cities around the world. He also included in bikes, realism and car-free cities are a must. And I think for having an actual depth of variety in cities around the world, it is true. Not every city is as dependent on cars as Cities Skylines 2 makes, or even Cities Skylines 1 for that matter, makes it out to be. Obviously, we have pedestrian roads, but, you know, that was a whole DLC for Cities Skylines 1, and while it wasn't perfect, it was better than just having pedestrian streets like we do in Cities Skylines 2. So a more advanced system for that would also be awesome. Moose's number 2 is actually textured grass, so that way you didn't have to detail as much. Now, as we talked about in our dev mode video, which I will leave up in the annotations, there actually was a grass sprite in development at some point because it's hidden in the dev mode. It's not that great though, but it clearly was something that they were thinking about, so I hope that maybe they do work on that in the future to give us a little bit more details for Cities Skylines 2. Number 3 would be a better option for service buildings that suit smaller cities. And this was a huge complaint I actually had for Cities Skylines 1, specifically with libraries. I actually wanted to place a lot more libraries in Cities Skylines 1 than the game allowed me because the only library asset we really had access to was massive, and there was really only a couple library assets up on the workshop. Now, where I live at in my city, which is Grand Rapids, Michigan, I have a library pretty close by, and it's not very big. So I think it's a little unrealistic to have a lot of these building ploppable assets that are just so big in scale, or they only really fit certain varieties of cities. So it'd be really cool to have a lot more depth, especially in the vanilla game, for that feature. Moose's number 4 would just be a Parklife DLC, which he gave a little bit more of a description on and said that he would really like it if it would encourage pedestrians to use paths a bit more and have a bit more in-depth features. So not necessarily a Parks DLC, but more a pedestrian DLC that would include some Parklife features. And then Moose's number 5 wishlist item for Cities Skylines 2 was to have even more additions to the road upgrades that give us more creative freedom over our roads. Things like when they add bikes, being able to just add bike lanes to the roads or any roads we want, just like we can do with trams. Obviously, there's a ton we can do with bikes, but I think this is a really good idea. And obviously, when he says this, it just makes sense. Oh yeah, that's definitely how they'll add bike lanes, right? Because we already have these modular roads, so that would be super sick. More decoration options for the roads other than just trees and grassy strips, and just allow us to be able to get creative with what roads look like. And I think that is a super great idea. The next person we have giving us a top 5 list is somebody who doesn't only just make Cities Skylines 2 content, but also makes content for a game called Squad, which you should also go check out his Squad channel, which is not Cities Skylines focused at all, but if you like FPS games, you might actually really like that, and that's Slay 3K. Now, again, Slay didn't give me in any particular order. I don't think any of these content creators gave me a particular order, as a matter of fact, so don't think that any of them are prioritized, but these are the 5 that Slay gave. The first one was some sort of surface painter functionality similar to what we have in dev mode available in the game for everyone to use. Would be great to have with a beachfront property DLC, which we are actually getting, I think is the beachfront content creator pack, right? So it would be really cool to have access to those surfaces that I explained earlier in the video as a base game functionality. And I think he's totally right. I love messing around with these surfaces, and it would be really cool if everyone could have access to them. I could literally spend all day just painting and customizing the ground of my city. I'm not kidding. The second thing Slay gave me was actually Move It, but then I reminded him that the context of the question was not to actually talk about mods, which Move It is something that Cuboid is actively working on and is probably going to be ready by the time PDX Mods comes out. I did hear that he got Undo and Redo working with the mod, which is super awesome. So that is also a feature that isn't available in the game, by the way. That's just an honorable addition, is where is our Undo feature? But moving on from that, the next one that Slay gave me is more functionality for keys and retaining walls, or at least the ability to customizably turn them on or off. There's obviously a mod for that, but having the game automatically decide whether or not there should be a key or a retaining wall is really frustrating when you actually start trying to force it into your build, because then roads start getting curves and it just looks really bad. And there's a mod that allows us to actually do it in a really nice way, but having that be a vanilla functionality would go a long way for helping people create what they're actually envisioning. The third thing Slay gave was more options for road textures and path textures. Example, brick roads and brick pedestrian paths. There's a lot of brick roads throughout Europe and even parts of America, especially old towns here in America. And they're starting to use brick roads in certain communities and around certain things like elementary schools to remind cars that they need to drive slower, because brick roads encourage slower driving and it causes cars to be noisier, so that way pedestrians are actually paying a bit more attention to the cars as they're driving through. It's honestly a safer road type all around. So it would be really cool to be able to include those in things like pedestrian heavy areas, especially around elementary schools in the game. I think this is an excellent thought and idea from Slay. Slay's fourth thing was props, just being able to put benches down or rocks just without the use of dev mode. And again, I'm just surprised this isn't a base game functionality as of yet. I'm assuming this has to do with the asset editor, and we might get it by the time that's finished. The last thing Slay said was improved traffic flow and decision making, and oh boy, I cannot tell you how many times I have built an intersection and then I look at the intersection and saw cars just stopping and going and deciding to change lanes right at the traffic light when there's no node there or reason for them to change the lane at the traffic light. I thought that they could have that worked out for Cities Skylines 2, and boy was I wrong. So I would also really like them to fix the traffic decision making in 2024. And the final creator we have today is the handler of Lane Man himself, Cities by Diana. And she actually recorded a whole voiceover for hers, so I'm gonna let her explain her top 5.
Well, first of all, custom assets and assets in general. The game needs more visual variety, and Any kind of new buildings will help a lot with that. I'd also love to see more map themes such as desert and tropical. The environments we have right now are very limiting. And then something needs to be done about the way that zoning just breaks so easily. Maybe a zoning adjuster built into the vanilla game like we had in the first one. I'd also really like some variety in the detailing options. Parks, props, vegetation, rocks, and everything else. Some of this is available using dev mode, but a prop menu built right into the game would be great. And of course, I think we're getting a couple of DLCs that focus on this, but generally better waterfronts. We really have no way to activate our shoreline right now and make it feel alive, so I'm looking forward to something like that.
So first off, I want to thank all of the creators who gave their top 5s for Cities Skylines 2. It was really cool to be able to talk about other content creators and what their thoughts or opinions are on the video, because I think it gives a lot more depth and a lot more ideas for you at home of what we maybe could expect for Cities Skylines 2 or things to want in the coming year. Just a reminder that all of their channels are linked below, and I highly suggest you guys follow all of them on all of their platforms. They're all really great content creators and also all really great people who put a ton of time and effort into their content. That being said, I want to thank you guys for watching today. I appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed all the footage in the background, and I hope you guys have a better idea of what you could be looking forward to, or just even mods to ask for, or things to just ask Colossal Order for the game in this coming year. They are always looking and hunting for what we want in the game, and hopefully one of these wishlist items gave you ideas or things to ask for. Remember, the weekly updates are coming back this Sunday, and there is a ton of stuff that we missed over the holiday break, so make sure you guys have notifications turned on so you guys can keep up to date with those. That's it for this wishlist video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Deuces.